Hey, what's up everyone? My name's William, and today we're going to be going over Logic Pro's user interface. So when we open up a new session, we see there's a lot of things to look at. There's buttons and displays at the top. We have parameters over on the left-hand side, and also if we've made any tracks, we can see those, and we can see our timeline here. So today we're going to be going over all of the basic navigation and things in the user interface of Logic Pro, just so we can effectively and efficiently use Logic as a DAW. Starting off, we're going to be going over some of the buttons at the top, starting with the left-hand side. So over here we have this library button, and this opens up the library, which has a ton of instruments that Apple has given to us with Logic. These are all default instruments that has come with Logic. We have basses, we have drum kits, electronic drum kits, and etc. And a bunch of these have sometimes subcategories and things like that. For example, synthesizers has a ton of subcategories that go into even more presets. So that's something to keep in mind. This is our basic instrument library that we can go through if we want to select different patches and things like that for our instrument tracks. And we can show and hide that just by clicking the library button to toggle that. Next we have this inspector button, it shows us our parameters for the region and track that we're looking at. And if we toggle that on and off, it's actually the window that I have open already. That's why it's already clicked in. And we have, right here we have our region inspector, which it shows us different parameters for the different regions that we're looking at. Whether, depending on which region we have clicked, you can see that's changing here. We also have our track parameters here, which determines what we're looking at based on the track. Notice the region window is also changing as I'm switching tracks, since the regions are in different tracks. And these these two areas control basic things, like we see there's a mute option, there's a loop option, quantize, things like that. And then the same for the track. We have some basic options. We have transpose, things like that for MIDI. And then for audio, we have which type of freeze mode, if we want to flex the audio, stretch it out or shrink it. And then moving down to the bottom, we'll always have our track fader for the track that we have selected, our volume fader for the track we have selected, at the very bottom here, along with a mute and solo button for the track. We have a panning knob right here, which will pan the track left or right, whichever track we have selected. And then we also have, up here we have our effects. We have, our EQ right here, a MIDI effects slot, our actual instrument slot here on MIDI tracks. And then we have, our audio effects here. We have different sends if we want to send the audio signal. Of course, we'll be going into all these things more in depth in later lessons. This is just, I'm just letting you know what these are, what they mean. Then we also have the output slot, which determines where the track is going to be outputted to. By default, it is the stereo output, which is the main output. Then we have our automation mode pop-up menu, which again, we'll be going over all of these in depth later. We also have a group slot if we have track groups that we have selected. And then we also, like I've already said, we have our volume fader here. And depending on whether or not we have a send selected, on the right-hand side we will have our volume fader for either our stereo out or wherever our output's going for the track, or any sends that we have on the track. So that's something to keep in mind. It'll always be paired with another fader, depending on which one we're looking at, depending on if it's a bus or a stereo output. Again, we'll be going over all of this more in depth in later lessons. So if you're confused about what it means, don't worry, that's going to be covered in later lessons. I'm just here to inform you of what it is, So moving on, we have this toolbar button here, which the toolbar button, it shows the toolbar, which contains buttons for certain functions. We have a track zoom button that will zoom. We have a note repeat button that will repeat notes. We have spot erase button. Split by playhead, this will split our regions at the playhead. As you see, I clicked it, it split it into two different regions. This analog base region was split by locators. This is dependent on the position of the cycle, and we can either, when we are asked to split something, it'll ask us if we want to keep the notes, shorten them, or split them, dependent, as we have overlapping notes, or notes that are overlapping through the cycle. I'll just split them to make it simple, and you see we have now this region was cut dependent on where that cycle was. I'm going to undo that though, Command Z. We also have this join option. So if we have, split regions at the playhead, we can highlight them and then join them. With those, we have a bounce regions button right here, which it bounces it to an audio track. Like so, we can bounce it and tell it to bounce to a new track. This is just, it's useful sometimes for different for synths. Right now, this is no longer MIDI; it's an audio track here. Moving on though, next, we have move to playhead. So if I have this and I click the playhead over here, it'll move that region to where my playhead is. We have nudge, which can, you won't be able to see it unless we zoom in, but this is actually nudging the track very slightly left and right. And right now I'm actually holding the Alt key and sliding around with my my mouse here, which determines how much we're zooming in. But see, if I click on this and I nudge it, you can actually see it very slightly moving to the right. Since I'm nudging it right, you can change the value you're nudging it by 2. Zooming back out, we have a repeat section button right here, which it actually repeats a section based on where the cycle is. So if you need to repeat a loop real quick, that's an easy way to do that. We have a cut section, which it cuts it depending on where the cycle is. I'm just going to click no on that. We have insert section, which inserts a section where our cycle range is. We have an insert silence if we want to insert a silence to our track, just a blank area. It's better to be used on audio. For example, if I did it right here, it inserts a huge gap of silence right here in between our audio clip. So those are some of those options. We also have a set locators option right here, which determines where our end and our beginning of our cycle range is going to be dependent on any clips we have highlighted. Before you saw it, it told me there wasn't a area selected because I didn't have a region highlighted. Next, we have a zoom tool. It zooms in and zooms out for us. If we just click it, it's like a toggle. And then we also have colors. If we want to change the color of a track, we can do that. So that's all the options in the toolbar menu. And those are all very useful when you're still learning Logic, but there is actually key commands for most of these. If you study up on the key commands, you can easily do a lot of these by just learning a key command. Next, we have the quick help button, which this is very useful, especially when you're new to Logic. You're going to want to have this on like 90% of the time, because what this does is it actually has this little box right here, which I don't know if you've been paying attention, but as I'm highlighting over stuff, actually in that top left-hand box over there, it's telling me a brief description of whatever I'm highlighting. So if I have a MIDI region highlighted, or if I'm hovering over a MIDI region, it's going to be showing me that I'm hovering over a MIDI region. Same with audio region, name field of a track, track icon. It's just a very helpful tool, especially when you're learning Logic's UI. It's very useful to have up. It tells you, it gives you a brief description of literally everything in Logic. So we're going to keep that open, just like I've had it open for the beginning of this video. Moving on, we have these smart controls. This smart controls button, which brings up a smart controls area, which it shows some things we can change on the sound on the fly. It's nice for quick modifications of your sound. Moving on, we have the mixer button, which brings up our mixer window. This shows all of our tracks. It shows, just like we have a brief inspector in the inspector window, we have a brief view of our faders and things like that. The mixer window has all of our tracks, all of the faders, all of the effects for every single one of our tracks in the project, including our stereo out and then our master. So this is very useful. You're going to definitely be using this view for when you're finishing up tracks and when you're balancing levels and things like that on your tracks. So that's definitely something to remember. And you can just toggle it again, like all of these other ones. You can just click on and off the button to toggle the view. And with the mixer, it sometimes starts out small. And same with the control view and even the one we're going to be going over next, which is the editor's button. It always opens the views kind of small sometimes, so you can always just hold your mouse over the top line of the top bar of the area and click and drag to change the view size of that. So moving on, we have next the editor's button, which it brings up our editing window for either our MIDI that we have highlighted, or if we have an audio track selected and an audio region selected, it'll have our audio region down here as well. So that's just some quick views for your editing if you need to change anything or make any adjustments. Moving on, though, we have the rewind button, which takes us back one bar, or our forward button, which takes our playhead one bar forward. Next, we have a go to beginning button. This button right here, it puts us at the very beginning of the track. So if we're way out here or something, this is a quick way to get back to the beginning. Next, we have our play button, which simply just starts the playback of our track. And I'm just going to play it out here so there's no sound. I have to turn off this cycle range first in order for it to play out here. So then I'm going to just click the play button, and as you can see, the play button is highlighted when it's playing, and also that beginning button goes to a stop button. See that? So that's something to keep in mind. We also have a record button if we want to record tracks. Then we have our display right here. It shows us what bar, beat, etc. we're at in the track. We have our key beat, or we have our song BPM here, our key, our time signature. We also have things like this cycler button, which it turns on and off the cycler for our tracks, which enables us to loop certain parts of our project here. Then we also have a tuner button, which this will help tune instruments connected to the system. We can't use it right now since we don't have anything plugged in. We don't have a guitar or anything like that. But this is what you can use to help tune instruments. Next, we have this replace button, which it replaces an existing recording or portion of it with a new recording. Then we have the solo button, which it solos the regions we have selected. It's not just the track, it's just the regions. So that's something to keep in mind. A track solo is different than a region solo. We also have this count in button, which it toggles whether or not we want a count in before we record, while we're, when we're going to record. And then we also have a metronome button, which enables the metronome or disables the metronome for playback while we are playing our track or our recording. Then over on the right here we have our master volume slider. We can slide this up and down. This is our master volume. It's always here. We can see it at all times. Beside that, we have our list editors button. It's where we can view and edit different MIDI events. So right now we can see our different regions. So if we were to automate them or things like that, we could do those changes here. We also have the markers, tempo, and time signature options here. Next, we have the notepads button if you need to type any notes about your project or your track or anything like that. Then next to that button, we have the Apple Loops button, which it brings up a huge list of Apple loops, Apple audio loops that we can use. That's actually where I got this guitar strum right here. So you can basically just search through Apple loops by clicking on different buttons here by filtering out different things. For example, I just clicked organ and then clean, and then this is the only clean organ sample that it could find in our Apple loops library. So that's just something to keep in mind. You can also search by name at the top here. Next, we have our browsers, our media browsers, which it can browse media in the project, media on our computer if we need to import anything, and then all files. We can look at all files on the computer through this window here. Then, of course, we've already gone over most of the things, and I think we've covered this a little bit, but of course these are our tracks here. We have 3 tracks. We also have different regions. We have a MIDI region and audio region here. I know that was a lot to throw at you. Those are all the main features of the Logic user interface. There's some more advanced ones up here. There's snapping, different functions and things like that. But those are all the basic ones. We have our control buttons, things like that up here, so we can navigate through our library. We have our inspector, things like that, if we want to go through Apple loops. So that was a lot to cover, but I hope it helped you out. I covered, all of the basic things in the Logic user interface. And again, always make sure while you're learning Logic, definitely have this quick help button enabled. It'll help you explain anything you're not sure about. It gives you brief descriptions of anything your mouse is hovering over. So that's something to keep in mind. But I hope you learned something from this video. I hope you understood everything that was covered. I hope you enjoyed. Again, my name is William. Thank you for watching.